So a dad was pushing a shopping cart at a supermarket, and he was just loading it up and had lots of stuff inside the cart. And his little boy, barely 2 years old, was sitting in the little seat facing his dad. And as he was pushing the cart, the kid was losing it. He was just screaming. And of course, somebody somewhere came up with a great idea in those shopping carts. They added seatbelts. You guys remember that? Because there was a time there were no seatbelts, but then they added seatbelts, which was just great. So little kids, he's belted in. He's not going anywhere. But the dad, dealing with a 2-year-old screaming like that in a grocery store must have been overwhelming. And so as he was screaming and the dad's pushing the cart, trying to do what he's supposed to do, he's heard saying over and over again, okay, Andy, keep calm, Andy. Don't get upset, Andy. Don't yell, Andy. Over and over again, okay, Andy, keep calm, Andy. Don't get upset, Andy. And as he walked around the corner, there was a woman who walked up to him, and she smiled and she said, wow, you're an amazing dad. You sure are very patient with little Andy. At which point the man responds, lady, my name is Andy. The word patience that's used here in James chapter 5, it's used 4 times. And 4 times in 5 verses tells you something. It's important. It's important that we get that this is what the passage is about. Patience is an interesting word in Greek, this particular word for patience, because what it means is long breathed. So the idea is that you have the breathing that happens normally, and then there's long breathing. And you might say like this, that would be patience, but it kind of fails in its interpretation. It really means to have to have something opposite of a short fuse, have a long fuse. Okay, so the idea is that you're long suffering, that you're committed to the waiting, but you're recognizing with honesty that in the midst of the waiting, there's a part of you that wants to do something, anything, everything other than wait, and yet you still wait. That's patience. When you have exhausted yourself through the things that you've exhausted yourself with, and you recognize it's not helping, and you just let go. That's patience. And so there are truths that we need to understand about patience, because James 1 verse 2 says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So in other words, let patience have its perfect work, that you may be mature, that you may be what you're supposed to be, lacking nothing. It goes on in verse 5, and for a lot of people, this doesn't seem to attach, but in verse 5 it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But if you think about what it's like to be right there in verses 2, 3, and 4, verse 5 makes a lot of sense. Because when you find yourself in a place where you do have various trials, so it's not just 1 or 2 or 3, you have multiple areas where things are coming against you, you feel overwhelmed, your next response is to ask a question. Why? Why is this happening? What should I do? How can this stop? And so you're looking for answers. In other words, you're looking for wisdom, which is why James goes on to say in verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach. The idea isn't so much that when you ask the questions, he's going to give you an answer specifically to your question that you like or want, but he will speak. He'll give you an answer. And so we need to be in that place where we're recognizing there are things that we need to learn, which is part of the reason why the trial or the trouble or the difficulty or the hardship or the affliction or the persecution has come. Dr. Robert Leidner from Dallas Theological Seminary was a professor of theology. And when he was younger, he was in a terrible plane crash. He was in a single-engine plane that flipped over during takeoff. And all the weight, of course, landed on the cockpit. And his wife had come to the site, so she was nearby. And she said that when she looked at him, she saw a black mass of flesh that didn't even look like her husband. And she thought, he's gone. But he was rushed to the hospital, and after months and months of therapy, he recovered. In fact, he fully recovered. But during the whole process of the initial accident, and of course all the surgeries and all the recovery of the surgeries, he said this to his students: I learned things I didn't know I needed to learn. I think that's very wise. I think every one of us needs that. Sometimes we need to learn things that we didn't know we needed to learn, and that's why a problem comes. That's why there's a trouble. That's why there's a hardship. That's why there's an affliction. That's why there's suffering. There's something that we need to learn. And so we look today here at James chapter 5, verses 7 through 11, and we see 5 truths that help us to be patient in suffering. Number 1, it can't last forever. Notice what it says here in verse 7. Therefore, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. So have a long fuse. Be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. What we need to remember when we're going through difficult times is that thing that we're going through, it has an expiration date. It's not going to last forever, because there's nothing in this world that lasts forever. And what that means for you and I in a practical way, when we're going through hardship and you think, you know what, I'm going through this difficult time. I'm going through this thing that's overwhelming. I'm going through this torturous experience. You might even say something like this: it's hell on earth. Or it's my personal hell. You might cry out in that way and say something like that. What you need to remember, what I need to remember is this: that as a believer in Jesus Christ, the closest that we'll ever get to hell is that thing that you're dealing with here on earth. And some of you have dealt with horrible things, or some of you are dealing with horrible things this morning. Things that are overwhelming. And if you felt like you could open up and you could share all the things that you're dealing with and how you're feeling about it and what it's done to you, someone else might say, well, gosh, it sounds like a personal hell. And yet the truth is still the truth. Hell is forever. But your suffering, whatever it is, your pain, no matter how much it hurts, is not forever. It's temporary. And if we can own that truth, then we can tap into this idea of growing in patience. Because we recognize, you know what? It isn't forever. Because this life will be over. And then we're reminded again of that truth. This life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And so the thing that you're dealing with can be like a hammer and a nail, or that thing that you're dealing with can be like a saw. Troubles, difficulty, trials, hardship, our anxieties, all those things can be like something that causes us to be bound together to God. Like a hammer and nail, putting us together and making it tight. Or it can be like a saw that separates us from God. We choose. Pain is inevitable. There's no one that gets through life without it. Bitterness is a choice. And when it comes to this type of issue, when we think it's something that's going to last forever, you start to settle into it. You start to say, well, this is the way it's always going to be. And even if it's always going to be that way in your life, it doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, because we know that there's life after death. And so, again, it can't last forever, whatever the thing is. You know, some would say, well, it's not going to kill you. Well, it might kill you, right? But it can't last forever. And that's something I think we can take home. Turn your Bibles over to 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians 4, we're looking here at verse 16 through 18. Second Corinthians 4, verse 16. Paul is speaking here, a man who is very well acquainted with pain and suffering and with trials. And he says, therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. Now, before we go on, he's just talking about normal life stuff. And when you're young, of course, you don't think about, the difficult days. This is why Ecclesiastes in its wisdom says that those who are young need to remember their Creator in the days of their youth before the difficult days come. And you say, I have no pleasure in them. But the difficult days are inevitable, and that's what he's talking about. Therefore, we do not lose heart. He's not even talking about tough stuff. He's just talking about life stuff. Therefore, we do not lose heart, even though the outward man is perishing. Okay? Our outward man, whether you recognize it or not, is perishing. All of you, as men and women, you're getting older, which means you're dying. Right now, you're dying. You're like, I thought I'd be encouraged. You should be. Right now, you're dying. You're getting closer and closer to the day of your death as you sit here right now. The outward man is perishing. Notice if it goes on, the inward man is being renewed day by day. It goes on in verse 17 and it says this, for our light affliction is but for a moment. What affliction is he referring to? Any affliction. Not just growing older, but our light affliction is but for a moment, and it's working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Well, we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporary, and the things which are not seen are eternal. In other words, open your eyes and you look around your whole life, all of it is temporary. What's eternal is what's in heaven. What's eternal is your relationship with Jesus Christ. So all those difficulties, it's working in you, it's working in me. And of course, it makes us have that longing for eternity, which is why Job, a man who suffered, of course, more than anybody else that we read about anywhere in the Bible, save for Jesus, he says in Job 14, verse 14, all the days of my hard service, I will wait till my change comes. In other words, what he's literally saying is, all the days of my hard service, I have learned to be patient. I have learned to be patient for my change. Not yet. Meaning, the change isn't going to happen yet. You're still waiting. So 5 truths that can help us be patient in suffering. Number 1, it can't last forever, which means we need to learn how to persevere. There was a professor at Johns Hopkins University named Dr. Kurt Reiter, and this was back in 1957, who did a study on the perseverance of particular types of animals, and one of the ones that he did was on Norway rats. And the reason why he did it was there were rumors of rats swimming out into the Pacific Ocean. Apparently there were people that were discovering into harbors in San Francisco way back when that they would see rats swimming around the bay, pretty common, but then they started finding that there were rats actually out in the ocean. And so they assumed that either those rats had swam out there, far out, I mean many, many miles out, or they had jumped off of ships and swam as long as they could, and then of course died. And so he wanted to discover what their capacity was for endurance, and so he tested them. And he put rats into large tanks that were clear, and he observed them. And he noticed that the first group that he put in, they were able to swim for 2 minutes. And when he put them in, they swam for 2 minutes, they gave up, and they drowned. So the next time he let them swim just shy of 2 minutes and then pulled them out of the water and then put those same rats back into the water a few moments later, and they swam for 15 minutes. He got a brand new batch, did the same thing, let them swim for 15 minutes, and then they gave up and died. So he took another group, went through the whole process of the 2 minutes, the 15 minutes, and once they learned that they would be rescued, he put them in the tank again, and they were able to swim for 60 hours. Meaning, when we go through hardship, when we go through trials, we will say something like this: if you really go through it, I can't take this. I can't take it anymore. Listen, that's the part of you that hasn't experienced the rescuing. And yet there's a God in heaven who does not sleep or slumber, who sees your needs, and if you cast your cares to him, if you run to him, he rescues. And what happens is now you go through that process of 2 minutes, 15 minutes, 60 hours, a lifetime of saying, all the days of my hard service, I will wait until my change comes. So it can't last forever. That's the first truth. The second truth is this: it won't be wasted. Hold on. It won't be wasted. Notice verse 7. It goes on, therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. It goes on to say, see how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and the latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. So the idea is this, is that the ground and of course the crops receive the nourishment that it needs. It receives the first rain, the second rain. It receives all the care from the husbandman, the farmer. But it's a faith issue. It's why this type of analogy is used throughout the Bible. It's why I believe God's heart is uniquely for farmers. Because they understand the idea that there's only so much they can do, and then it's all trusted to God. The increase only comes if God gives it. And of course, throughout human history, there have been blights, there have been pestilence, there have been all sorts of things that have affected crops. So you can only do so much. And after you've done what you can do, you really are in that place you were in from the very beginning, and that's trusting God. You were trusting God even when you were working because your health comes from Him. You were trusting God even with your own abilities, your understanding, because that genius, your intellect, it comes from Him. You were trusting God with everything already, but now you're put into that position where you have to trust God. There's nothing else you can do. And so now you are waiting for Him to do what only He can do. And here's what happens. When the difficult things come, we're thinking it's not needed. But the truth is, it is needed. We just don't understand why it's needed. And we also don't understand that when the problems come, that we have a God who already has the answers for all the problems that you're going to face. Remember, one of His names, which is a beautiful name, Yehovah Shema, means this: He is the Lord who is there. Meaning this: He is where you are going. In other words, He is where you're going to need Him tomorrow. He's already there. And He has all the answers. And He happens to be in love with you. So if all that is true, now you have reason to hope, understanding that the thing that you're going through won't be wasted. Because that's a big thing when somebody's going through hard things, is how's this going to be worth it? Will it be worth it? Is it just going to be a lost period of time? Is it a lost experience? Is it a lost investment? Listen, it won't be wasted. Verse 7, notice again, see how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. Verse 8, you also, just like that farmer, be patient. Don't miss this. Establish your hearts. What it means is to strengthen, but more specifically, it means to posture yourself in such a way to withstand the attack. Don't be flat-footed in the midst of your suffering. Understand you're going to get hit, and it's going to happen again and again, but it's going to make you stronger. It's going to make you better. It's not going to be wasted. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Now listen, there is a unique pine tree, a unique evergreen called the lodgepole pine. It's common to Yellowstone Park. But what's interesting about this pine tree is that the pine cones, which are, of course, the seed of the tree, the pine cones will stay on there longer than normal evergreens. They'll stay on there for years. And if they fall to the ground, they won't open. They're useless. The only way that the lodgepole pine cone can become a seed that produces another tree is intense heat. God has designed this tree to burn, so that when the worst thing comes for a forest, fire, it produces life for the next generation of trees. Where that tree falls, that pine cone will experience heat that's intense. And when everything is over, it'll start to grow again. That's our life. We go through hardship. We go through difficulties. We go through intense things, and maybe even an intense heat. But it's not going to be wasted. God will use it. And it's going to be something that is productive. It's going to be something that is fruitful, not because that thing that happened is good, but because you have a God in heaven who is good. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, it's talking about the thorn in the flesh. Paul has prayed 3 times that the thorn in the flesh would be removed. We don't know what it was, but it was something horrible. It was something that was overwhelming. It was something that was life-dominating. And yet, it isn't removed. And then Jesus says to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." Paul goes on to say, "Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in my infirmities, in reproaches, and needs, and persecutions, and distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Well, what's he saying? Well, here's what he's saying. Look, if I number my difficulties, if I number the hardship that I have, it's not just a thorn in the flesh. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. As he listed previously, the perils of this, the perils of this, the perils of this, all these different things that he's gone through besides the other things. Which I don't think the other things were the things that weren't important to him. I don't think as he's listing all these different things that he's gone through, which were horrible things, tons of them, I don't think when he gets to this thing that he thinks about while he's writing, the other things, besides the other things, that just aren't that big of a deal. I think it's more like besides the other things. The things that make him pause. And make him just go like, this is the thing that really causes me pain. This is the thing that's too hard to even say. That thing, God, take it away. And you could cry out again and again and again, God, take it away, take it away, take it away. And whatever that thing is, you hear, my grace is sufficient for you. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. At which point, again, don't miss what he says. Therefore, because of this whole process, and because of what he's been encouraged in, because he's being told it's not going away, it's going to be used because nothing will be wasted. He says, then, therefore, I take pleasure in my infirmities and reproaches and needs and persecutions and distresses. In other words, I take pleasure in my infirmities, reproaches, needs, persecutions, distresses, for when I am weak, I am strong. Guys, this is Psalm 94, verse 19. Nothing is wasted. Psalm 94, verse 19 says, in the multitude of my anxieties, your comforts delight my soul. Listen again. In the multitude, tons, in the multitude of my anxieties. This word means the things that pull my attention here, 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 here. In the multitude of my anxieties, as if, boom, like with Job. And while he was yet speaking, another came. And while he was yet speaking, another came. And while he was yet speaking, another came. Or the whole generation that wandered through the wilderness, getting attacked by Balak through Balaam, from here, from here, from here. In the multitude of my anxieties, yea, they have increased who trouble me. They've surrounded me. And they cry out, there's no help for him in God. Yet thou, Lord, art a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. The thing that David tapped into, the thing that Job embraced, what Balaam learned, Paul is saying the same thing that the psalmist is saying. In the multitude of my anxieties, your comforts delight my soul. Meaning this, for every anxiety, there's a comfort. You have anxieties, plural. There are many. And you have comforts, plural, that are many. Which is why Paul would write, of course, thanks be to the God of all comfort who comforts me in the things that I am afflicted with, so that we will be able to be a comfort to those who are afflicted in the same manner as us. Because nothing is wasted. Anything you go through is something that God will use. So when we dealt with ants coming into our house in California. It was a miserable season. And they were Argentinian ants, and you could tell by the way they walk, because they walk different than other ants. They walk fast. And they took over our house, and it was a frustrating thing. But frankly, it was not as frustrating as when we dealt with meal moths. Meal moths came in the cardboard of our cereal boxes, and that was frustrating. And that lasted for a long time. That wasn't as bad as lice. Because when we had a problem with lice, because some kid at our child's school had lice and went to school and the whole class got it, and then our kids kept on getting it, and once they get over it, they would give it to somebody else, and again, and again, and again. That's why I'm bald, the lice, right? That was a trying thing that lasted for months. And then we had termites, and then we had mice, and then we had deer mice, which are basically mice with horns, and they don't have horns, but we had them. And you went from thing to thing to thing. I don't know the purpose for that, but it's not wasted. When it came to the things that we dealt with our house, we had electrical issues in our house here in PG. We had a kitchen fire once. We had a gas leak once. But we had water leaks as well. And the first water leak was overwhelming. It was frustrating. It was in our bathroom. It caused major problems, and water ran down the wall, and lots of work needed to be done. But we called the insurance company. It was covered. Praise God. And, we got to see that nothing's wasted, because it wasn't long after we got a new bathroom. And then it happened again. And the second time that it happened, I thought, gosh, that's kind of overwhelming. It's frustrating, to deal with this water, sopping water all over. And yet we called the insurance company. It was covered just like the first time. And we had our second bathroom remodel paid for by the insurance company. So 2 bathrooms where we had major leak, 2 bathrooms we had to call the insurance company. 2 bathrooms got remodeled on the insurance company's dime because of our suffering, because nothing's wasted. So we started praying for a problem, because we had a 3rd bathroom. And then it happened, and I was like, oh, happy day. Right? True story. Called the insurance company. Sure enough, it was covered, and we had 3 bathrooms. We had all 3 bathrooms remodeled because of leaks, because nothing's wasted. And it wasn't long after that, we were at a park day talking to a friend. It was summertime. And as we were talking to this friend, we get a phone call on my phone. Somebody was dropping our kids off at our house, and when they were dropping them off, they pressed the gas rather than the brake, and they ran through our garage door. And so she was really broke it up, and she goes, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that. It was so stupid. I just wasn't paying attention. I ran through your garage door, and it's not just damaged, it's destroyed. And so I'm on the phone, and my wife is now talking to the person that we were talking to, but she's hearing everything. And I said, oh, okay. All right. Are you okay? And she, okay, I'm fine. That's all that matters. It's all good. Don't worry about it. No. Seriously, don't worry about it. Let it go. It's not a big deal. We have insurance, so forth. I hang up the phone, and I look over at my wife, and I said, that's so-and-so. They just drove through our garage door. They're okay, but it's okay. So we look over at the person and talking to them and said, so you were saying. And she goes, well, you just heard that your garage door got damaged by somebody, that they destroyed your garage door, they drove through it, and you're this calm? And I look over at my wife, and we smile at each other, and yeah. How could you be so calm? Insurance, we get things, right? Bad things happen, they pay out, and it turns a bad thing into a good thing. This is good. We literally needed to replace the garage door. To the day we left that house, every single time I'd open that new garage door, I would smile. Because nothing's wasted. But listen, it's different when you're dealing with those things, and when you're dealing with people issues, when you're dealing with bad attitudes, bad priorities, bad actions, or bad speech. It's a totally different ballgame. Because your emotions are attached. Your heart is vulnerable. And there's no insurance for it. And yet, by faith, we have to believe that nothing's wasted, not because those bad things are good, but because we have a God who's incredibly good, who's for us. Nothing's wasted. And so if we understand that it won't be wasted, we can grow in patience. Number 3, it isn't something new. So if we're going to have a truth that's going to help us become patient in suffering, we need to understand it isn't something new. Whatever it is that we're dealing with, it's not a new thing. Notice verse 9. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Meaning this, the issues that we might have between each other, the problems that we have with people, they're bigger issues than those other things. The other things that we can deal with, whether it's physical pain, whether it's financial loss, they're nothing compared to social, emotional issues. People issues are at the top of the list. And we need to know it's not new. They had people issues back then. And that's why it says, do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Attached, verse 10, my brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Meaning this, they went through the same things that we go through. They had the same struggles. Paul himself, a Pharisee, you couldn't be one without a wife, and yet he refers to himself in 1 Corinthians 7 as being single. Why? Guys, he lost. In some way, either his wife died or his wife divorced him when he came to Jesus Christ. He suffered. He was hurting. He had problems. He had pain. He had trials. And yet, he'd say, I glory in him. Well, James is saying this for a reason to us, that we can grow. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. That includes Paul, as examples of suffering and patience. What it means is this, whatever trouble that you are going through right now, it's not new. Other people have gone through it. Okay? Our daughter is pregnant. In fact, 2 of our daughters are pregnant right now. And as Rachel's getting closer and closer, that's a new thing. She's never had a baby before. And so she's nervous, uncomfortable, and the whole process, is something that's amazing but incredibly difficult. And I overheard her talking to my wife about how she felt. And my wife was sharing, how she felt. And I remember when Vicky got pregnant, it was after our honeymoon, we're a young couple, and we'd never done it before. And she's nervous, totally understandable. And I remember as we went in to the hospital that day, and she says, I don't think I can do this. I was like, you're going to do it. It's like, you could say all you want. I'm just being logical here. It's going to happen, right? But what she said is a normal thing to say. That's an overwhelming thing to consider, what's going to happen to her body. But you could say there's a fair amount of people who've done this. Even something like that is so hard, it's been done before. It's been done again and again, billions of times. The same thing is true about suffering. 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Will you turn there with me, please? 1 Peter 5, verse 8. We need to remember that the thing that we deal with that is overwhelming, that thing that is a trial for us, that might even make us feel weird. We might feel like everybody knows about that trial when you walk into a room. That thing that causes you to feel like, you know what? It's not that I want to kill myself, but I wouldn't mind dying. The thing that causes that much pain. Listen, others have gone through it. And they've survived, which is why it's so important that we remember that there is that cloud of witnesses. So let us run the race that we run with endurance set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Those that went before us, that cloud of witnesses, they went through what you're going through. And if you could hear them, you'd probably hear them saying, come on, you can do it. Hold on, endure. Notice what it says here in 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Meaning he wants to take every opportunity to hurt you, and he wants to use anything in your life to cause you to be pulled away from God, to saw you from God. That's what he wants to do. He wants to take those hardships of your life, and he wants to use them for the worst possible motive. All the while, God wants to redeem it, to draw you closer to him. So be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith. That's the idea of posturing yourself to take the blow, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world. Don't miss that last part. Knowing the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world, meaning you're not the only one that's going through that thing. But when you're hurting, you're tempted to think you are the only one. Listen, you're not the only one. Now, when you're hurting, you're thinking, no one understands, no one cares. Here's the truth. Though other people have gone through what you're going through, they don't understand. Because what you're feeling about what you're going through is different than what they're feeling about what they're going through. So it's true when you say that no one here on earth understands. And you might say no one cares. And here's the truth, the God honest truth. No one cares about what you're going through as much as you do. Except God. God cares. God cares more than you do. And God knows what you're going through more than you do. And so we need to understand the thing that we're dealing with, it isn't something new. That's a truth that can help us to grow in patience. 5 truths that help us to be patient in suffering. Number 1, it can't last forever. Number 2, it won't be wasted. Number 3, it isn't something new. Number 4, it hasn't destroyed you. So it feels like it well, you're still talking. It hasn't destroyed you. And even if you die, he makes all things new. So it hasn't destroyed you. Verse 11, indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job. Endurance means to stay under a burden, meaning you're not running from the thing, you stay in it, understanding there's nothing you can do about it. And so, indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You've heard of the perseverance of Job. Job went through a ton. In 2015, there was a 1-year-old pit bull mix named Thea. Thea was a happy dog, family dog, minding his own business on the farm where his family lived. And he was hit by a car. One person who saw the dog get hit by a car didn't help the dog, but walked up to the dog and hit the dog on the head with a hammer. The dog died. Picked up the dog and dug a deep hole and buried the dog in the hole. 4 days later, the dog came back to life. No, 4 days later, the dog dug out of the hole. Imagine that. A dog hit by a car, hit in the head with a hammer, cracked his skull, destroyed this dog's septum. The dog couldn't breathe properly, but the dog managed to dig itself out of the hole and shows up back at the house. Okay? It's a dog that's been through a lot. And here's the interesting thing about the dog. The dog was a family dog. The dog was a loving dog. When the family took the dog back, of course, they had a lot to pay for to bring healing to the dog, and they were able to help the dog fully recover. But they said the dog was more loving than it was before. Not because of the trauma, but because of the family's deep care. The same thing's true about people. It hasn't destroyed you, but what it might destroy is the parts of you that need to change. And suffering, pain, difficulty is an instrument that is more powerful than anything else that we can face on earth. And so it hasn't destroyed you, which is why 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8, I dedicate to Thea. We are hard-pressed on every side, yet crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. persecuted, not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Okay? It's true for us. 5 truths that help us be patient in suffering. It can't last forever. It won't be wasted. It isn't something new. It hasn't destroyed you. And lastly, it doesn't change God. God isn't changed. Verse 11 says, and we've seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. He doesn't change. He's very compassionate and he's a merciful God. Malachi 3:6 tells us, God speaking, I am the Lord, I do not change, therefore you're not consumed. He is good. He is kind. He is gracious. He is forgiving. He's compassionate. He's merciful. He's faithful. He does not change. God never changes. It was Spurgeon and a friend who were walking past a barn, and they saw on top of the barn a weather vane, usually a rooster. Only it wasn't a rooster on this weather vane. It was just a sign with an arrow. And the sign said, God is love. And when Spurgeon looked at the sign, he said, I don't like it. It sends the wrong message. Weather vanes are so changeable, but God's love is constant. His friend, looking at it more intently, said, Charles, I think you misunderstand the message. I think what they intend to say is God is love, whichever way the wind blows. And it's true. God is, in fact, love, whichever way the wind blows. That was the message that Thomas Chisholm understood. Though his body was racked by pain, and he dealt with health issue after health issue for decades. He prepares to go into the ministry. He becomes a pastor, serves faithfully, was used by God for 1 full year. But his health was so poor, he had to resign and had to move to a warmer climate. It was then, in 1923, that he wrote these words. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changeth not thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. And of course, his words are borrowed from Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 22. But it's what comes before verse 22. We need to remember, take to heart. Lamentations 3:19 says, remember my affliction, my roaming, the wormwood and the gall. In other words, remember my affliction, how it's moved me, and the bitterness of my soul. My soul still remembers and sinks within me. In other words, when I think about it, it brings me to that point of tears. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I hope in him. Meaning my expectation is in him alone. Because he is my true constant. This is what helps us, guys, to be patient. Notice again, 5 truths that help us be patient in suffering. Number 1, it can't last forever. Number 2, it won't be wasted. Number 3, it isn't something new. Number 4, it hasn't destroyed you. Number 5, it doesn't change God, because it's our God in heaven who loves us with an everlasting love. And that's why we know all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son. There's the answer to your question, why? Why? Because he's conforming you into the image of his Son. That's why you suffer. That's why you have trouble. That's why you have hardship. That's why you're hurting. Because the exceeding work of glory he's doing is he's making you day by day, moment by moment, experience by experience, more like Jesus Christ. Would you stand with me?